Chapter 1. Rebirth x Roy Zoldyck. The summers in the Podokea Republic were always hotter than usual. It was barely 5 in the morning, but a sliver of light was already clawing its way up the horizon. Seizing the moment before the oppressive heat fully descended, Roy was already up. He threw on a tank top and shorts and began his daily run around the entirety of Kagura Mountain. From the ancient family estate deep within the mountain, down to the butler's villa on the mountainside, then further down to the security station at the base, and all the way back up again. It was a route of nearly 100 kilometers. By the time he returned, he looked like he'd been fished out of a lake, drenched in sweat, yet feeling an indescribable sense of release. It's a scientific fact that running stimulates the release of endorphins, bringing a feeling of pleasure and exhilaration. But after catching his breath, Roy didn't feel the expected rush. Instead, his brow furrowed in frustration. The reason was simple. He, the eldest son of the Zoldyck family, the world's #1 family of assassins, a name that could make armies tremble, and also a transmigrator from a world called Earth, had noticed that his physical development was starting to plateau. Sure, training plateaus were a real thing. In the beginning, whether building muscle or cutting fat, the results were always most dramatic. After that initial burst, progress would inevitably slow and stabilize. But that applied to adults. It shouldn't apply to him, a boy of 8 years old, still in the prime of his body's growth and development. Moreover, he was a Zoldyck. His physical constitution was genetically superior to others from birth. Except for his black hair. A clear sign that he hadn't perfectly inherited the Zoldyck family's signature genetic gifts. Still, Roy operated on a principle he'd adopted in this new, brutal life: slow as smooth, and smooth as fast. His mindset was well adjusted. No anxiety, no despair. He returned to his bedroom and took a quick shower. When he emerged, he was dressed in a clean set of training gi and seated at the dining table. It was now 6 in the morning. As an ancient wooden grandfather clock in the corner chimed the hour, Goto, the head butler, arrived on schedule, pushing a cart with a lavish breakfast. Cream of mushroom soup, a bacon sandwich, a fresh salad made with wild vegetables foraged from Kagura Mountain, topped with a boiled egg and a drizzle of rice vinegar. And to finish, a tall glass of milk. It was perfectly balanced for nutrition. It was also utterly devoid of flavor. Roy casually dipped a corner of his sandwich into the soup and took a bite, listening as Goto recited his training schedule for the day. While the butler spoke, he discreetly opened his internal interface, his eyes scanning the details. Name: Roy Zoldyck. Biological age: 7 years, 11 months. Physique: 10 to 10.001. Note: average adult is 1. Nen: aura nodes dormant. Awaiting initiation. Combat experience: LV2 15/100. Assassin arts: Shadow Step. Proficient 78/100. Rhythm Echo. Proficient 64/100. Snake Awakens. Novice 83/100. Note: mastery is ranked: Novice, Proficient, Master, Perfect. Title: Untested Fledgling, easily culled. Untested Fledgling, huh. The system didn't pull any punches. Roy bit down hard on his sandwich, channeling his annoyance into the bite. Goto cleared his throat, leaning in slightly. Young master, he said in a low voice, the mistress has been in a poor mood recently. I would advise you to be careful. The mistress was Kikyo, Roy's birth mother. 3 pregnancies, 3 sons with black hair. Not a single silver-haired child among them. For a family obsessed with its legendary bloodline, this was a cardinal sin, the equivalent of failing to produce a worthy heir 3 times in a row. So, her anxiety and violent mood swings were, in a twisted way, understandable. Thankfully, her next child, Kahlua, wouldn't disappoint her. Miluki is a good kid, Roy said nonchalantly after swallowing, taking a sip of milk. A bit fat, a bit ugly, his eyes are a little small, and he's gassy, but other than that, he's fine. Mother may not like him, but I don't see the problem. Goto fell silent for a moment. He couldn't tell if the young master was genuinely complimenting Miluki or taking a veiled shot at him. He also recalled Roy's open dislike for his brother, Illumi, whom he found to be cold, emotionless, and creepy, with eyes like a dead doll. The butler decided it was safest to pretend he hadn't heard anything. He changed the subject. Young master, the master has decided to initiate your nen. The young butler, who had yet to grow his signature mustache, pushed his gold-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. His expression was solemn. The time is set for 8 o'clock tonight. He will be waiting for you in the training hall. Roy froze for a fraction of a second before his expression returned to normal. He picked up a napkin and wiped his mouth with a casual air, but beneath the calm facade, his heart began to pound. The bad news. Through years of observation, the Zoldyck elders, from Silva to Zeno, had reached a conclusion. He was merely a common genius. By initiating his nen early, they could mold him into a competent assassin, but as for inheriting the family business, that was a foolish dream. The good news. If his nen was successfully awakened, and if he happened to be an enhancer, this could be the very key to shattering the plateau of his weak physique. Either way, the decision was made. Tonight at 8, whether he wanted it or not, Roy Zoldyck would be forced into the world of nen. And this step, after nearly 8 years of being reborn into this monstrous family, was the moment he had been anticipating the most. A glint of fierce determination flashed deep within the boy's pupils as he finished his breakfast. On his father's orders, his usual training regimen was cancelled for the day. He spent the hours in meditation, calming his spirit and bringing his body to its absolute peak condition. He waited as night fell and a full moon rose into the sky. Then, he stood, pushing himself up from the floor. He walked out of his bedroom, the flickering wall sconces casting long, dancing shadows. He followed the deep, silent corridor all the way to the training hall. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed in the silence. Enter. A voice, thick with power, boomed from within. The heavy door swung open, revealing a portion of the vast room. A towering man stood with his back to the door, his legs spread wide in a perfect split, balanced on 2 massive stone blocks. A cascade of silver hair fell down his back like a waterfall. The aura he passively emanated was so powerful it felt like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. Silva Zoldyck, a world-class assassin who once single-handedly killed a member of the Phantom Troop and escaped without a scratch. Every time they met, Roy could feel it from this man he called father, a suffocating pressure and an overwhelming sense of danger. It wasn't a feeling between a father and son. It was the natural, crushing dominance a higher dimensional being exerts on a lower one. He steadied his nerves and took a deep breath. Father. Boom. The door slammed shut behind him. Silva turned his head, his gaze as sharp and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. Come here. Roy silently walked forward. He was met with a hand the size of a spade. It moved with a casual, almost lazy grace, yet it was faster than lightning as it slapped against his chest. Crack. An impossibly condensed wave of Ren shot through Roy's body. Without losing any momentum, it slammed into the wall behind him. A spiderweb of cracks instantly spread across the thick stone. At the same instant, a shackle deep inside Roy's body shattered. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. Aura Nodes X the Gate of Cognition. There are only 2 ways to awaken one's Nen. Narrator's note. Nen awakening can be achieved through 2 primary methods. The first is the slow, deliberate path of meditation, where one gradually learns to sense and control their own aura. The second is the forceful, often dangerous method of initiation, where an experienced Nen user strikes the student with their own aura, forcibly opening their aura nodes. With a master-class Nen user like Silva in the family, Roy was spared the tedious effort of meditation. He immediately felt the change. A milky white energy began to pour from his body, quickly enveloping him in a warm, protective shroud. The sight was both new and strangely familiar, just like when Wing forcibly initiated Gon and Killua back at Heaven's Arena. Roy quickly closed his eyes, focusing on an image he could easily grasp, and began the delicate process of gathering the escaping aura and drawing it back inside his body. Long before Silva had decided to initiate him, Goto had done his part, sharing every bit of theoretical knowledge he had on Nen and patiently explaining the precautions one must take before and after the opening of their aura nodes. But, knowing is not the same as doing. For Roy to be able to immediately begin controlling the flow of his aura mere moments after initiation, this feat of talent earned him a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance from Silva. But only a glance. Fu. With a few deep, controlled breaths, the aura leaking from Roy's body was completely drawn back within him. The boy opened his eyes again. For a split second, his pupils seemed to ignite with an inner flame, the spark of Nen, marking his true transition from a mere mortal into a Nen user. The feeling was extraordinary. It was as if his entire being had undergone a quantum leap, ascending to a higher state of existence. Looking back at the person he was just 3 seconds ago, he now felt a profound sense of confidence and composure, the self-assurance of a higher-order being. So this is Nen, Roy thought, feeling the changes within him. A fusion of physical energy, willpower, emotion, and the soul itself. As his mind raced, a familiar notification appeared in his vision. Host's aura nodes have been detected as open. Nen ability, the gate of cognition, has been awakened. Description: by entering a state of deep sleep, the host can dive into their own cerebral cortex and open their gate of cognition. Within this world of perception, you can absorb knowledge and power, then conjure it back into reality. So, I'm not an enhancer, I'm a conjurer. Roy was genuinely surprised. He had been certain that his overwhelming desire to strengthen his physical body, his most powerful vow, in a sense, would naturally lead him to awaken as an enhancer, the Nen category most suited for it. He never expected this result. But thinking back, he realized he'd overlooked a crucial detail: he was a transmigrator, reborn into this world. That, transmigration, was his deepest secret and, by extension, his greatest asset. His entire existence was predicated on a concept, a memory, a piece of knowledge from beyond. This was interesting. Was this some cosmic hint, telling him that instead of seeking power externally, he should be looking inward? Roy mulled over the 4 words, the gate of cognition. An immediate, powerful urge washed over him, to fall asleep right then and there and begin exploring. Unfortunately, 2 things stopped him. First, he was still buzzing with the excitement of his Nen awakening. Whether he could even fall asleep was debatable. Second, Silva was watching. He couldn't afford to be seen as lazy in the training hall, a place consecrated by sweat and blood. The cracked wall behind him was a gentle preview of the corrective training that would follow such a transgression. Silva Zoldyck was an expert at more than just killing. Roy had personally experienced his talent for torture. He suppressed his excitement and respectfully gave Silva a nod. "Father, I'll be returning to my room now." Silva just grunted noncommittally. He didn't say a word, didn't ask Roy to perform a water divination test to determine his type, didn't inquire about what kind of hatsu he planned to develop. He simply turned back to his stretches as if he had just performed the most trivial of tasks. Perhaps, to a father like Silva, he already knew the nature of his child. He had seen through Roy long ago. The reason he initiated him early was precisely because he had already determined the boy's ceiling was disappointingly low. Forget about partnering on missions in the future, it was questionable if Roy could even protect himself from being killed. So, what difference did knowing his Nen type make? Night fell. The midsummer wind made the wall sconces flicker, casting dancing shadows down the long corridor. As the training hall door opened and closed once more, the father and son were separated into 2 different worlds. Inside, Silva remained, a cold silhouette of coiled muscle in his black training GI. Outside, Roy's steps were light, an irrepressible grin finally spreading across his face as he hurried back to his bedroom. On his way, he passed a dimly lit room and gave a simple, respectful bow towards the door. Inside that room, an old man lay on a rocking chair, snoring softly to the sound of a cartoon playing on a small screen. He mumbled something unintelligible, shifted his position, and fell into an even deeper sleep. Yes, a perfect night for sleeping. Even if it wasn't Roy's usual bedtime, tonight, he had to sleep. Back in his room, Roy locked the door. He threw himself onto the bed, pulled out his smartphone, and put on a white noise for sleep app. Forcing his eyes shut, he focused on the sound. The chirping of cicadas outside the window, the rustling of leaves in the night wind. After about 10 minutes, he finally felt the pull of drowsiness. He let go, and fell into his own dream. His consciousness felt weightless, as if floating down a kaleidoscopic tunnel. From the end of the tunnel, he could faintly hear the sound of waves crashing against rocks, beckoning him forward. 1 step, 2 steps. A mix of curiosity and calm guided him. Soon, Roy emerged from the tunnel and found himself before a vast, endless ocean under a twilight sky. It was a stunning sight. But what was truly astonishing were the countless wooden doors standing on the surface of the water. Some were old and splintered, others brand new. Some were dark and foreboding, others polished to a gleam. They looked as if they had existed since the dawn of time, and every single one was sealed with a heavy lock. Except for one. To his right, the closest door was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling from the crack. Hanging above it was a wooden carving of a fierce Oni mask. Roy understood instantly. It was waiting for him. Without another moment's hesitation, he reached out, pushed the door open, and strode inside. Is so cold. In stark contrast to the sweltering heat of the Padokea Republic, the world within his gate of cognition was a landscape of falling snow. Roy opened his eyes again to find himself lying in a deep forest, covered in a thick blanket of snow. To his left was a hand axe. To his right, a woven basket filled with charcoal. So, in my own world of cognition, I'm a charcoal burner. He curiously examined his new body. He was wrapped in a thick, patterned houri over simple clothes. His feet were covered in thick tabby socks and slotted into wooden geta sandals. A mop of burgundy hair fell over his eyes. He looked remarkably similar to a character he knew from his past life, yet slightly different. Before his confusion could linger, the system panel appeared, providing the answer. Generating character role, Kamado Eiichiro, older brother of Kamado Tanjiro. It clicked. So this is the world of Demon Slayer. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 3. Practicing Assassin Arts X First Meeting of Brothers. What is cognition? In essence, it is the sum total of everything you have ever seen, heard, thought, and experienced. It is the complete mental framework built from perception, memory, and emotion. In his past life, Roy had watched Demon Slayer. He had projected himself onto its characters, felt their joy, their sorrow, their rage, and their despair. Because of that deep emotional investment, the story had left an indelible footprint on his soul, his cognition. Mulling this over, he pushed himself up from the snow. As he did, a small cloth pouch fell from his GI, spilling a few pieces of candy onto the white ground. The sight jogged his memory. Today was a celebration for his youngest sister, Hanako, who was now 1 month old. His presence here had altered the timeline. Tanjiro was no longer the eldest son. Rokuda, the original youngest, had not yet been born. This meant he was 2 or 3 years before the start of the canon plot. Not only was his father, Tanjiro Kamado, still alive and well, but so was his grandmother, the kind, white-haired old woman who would often hold Tanjiro while watching the stars. It was a strange parallel. In reality, Roy was the eldest son of the Zoldyck family. In his world of cognition, he was the eldest son of the Kamado family. Perhaps it was this resonance between his two lives that allowed him to open the door to this specific world. Roy sensed a connection there. He bent down, picking up the candies one by one, before beginning a full diagnostic of his current state. First, Nen, Roy focused, attempting to channel the aura within him. He directed the flow towards the tip of his right index finger. A faint, milky white glow appeared. It was weak, and barely visible against the bright snow, but it was unmistakably there. A wave of relief washed over him. After all, this world, much like the world of hunters, was no paradise. It was a world stalked by man-eating demons. Having Nen, especially before he could master any breathing styles or acquire a Nichiren blade, was a critical advantage. Next, the assassin arts. Shadow Step, Rhythm Echo, and Snake Awakens. Narrator's note. Shadow Step is the foundational movement technique of the Zoldyck family, built on 4 principles: silence, weightlessness, deception, and illusion. To move with the lightness of a swallow, with the phantom-like unpredictability of a dream. Roy took a single step and his body seemed to dissolve into motion. He became a ghost, gliding through the ancient forest, shifting east then west, his form a blur among the trees. He moved so perfectly that he left not a single footprint in the deep snow. This surreal display completely stunned a certain someone who had come looking for him, worried that his big brother was out in the woods after dark. Today was Hanako's celebration, and their father, Tanjiro, had sent his eldest, Eiichiro, down the mountain to buy supplies. When he hadn't returned by dusk, their mother, Kai, sent Tanjiro, the one with the nose like a bloodhound, to find him. Tanjiro found his brother, all right. But the sight broke his brain. The earnest, kind-hearted boy was bundled in a thick, green and black checkered houri, a light purple scarf wrapped around his neck. He stood frozen in the falling snow, his beautiful amber eyes reflecting the ghostly, dancing figure of Roy. The words, "Big Bro," were caught in his throat. A single thought repeated in his mind. Is that really my brother Eiichiro? It was 100% his brother. His eyes could be deceiving him, but his nose never lied. Tanjiro twitched his nose, confirming the familiar, gentle scent of his brother. Convinced, he quietly ducked behind a large tree, peeking out with just his head. Meanwhile, Roy, having finished his warm-up with Shadow Step, didn't pause to rest. He immediately began practicing Rhythm Echo. This assassin technique was, in essence, an advanced application of Shadow Step. It added a powerful layer of misdirection to confuse the opponent. Roy took a deep breath and moved again. In an instant, a circle of after images blurred into existence around his starting point, each one looking as solid as the real him. It was the same technique Kagura had once used against Chairman Netero while trying to steal the ball on the airship. Of course, Netero was on another plane of existence entirely, far beyond what a rookie who hadn't even learned Nen could ever hope to touch. But that was Isaac Netero, the strongest human alive. This was just Tanjiro, a boy who had never seen a real fight in his life. Seeing this, Tanjiro's eyes went wide. He started dumbly counting on his fingers, trying to figure out how many brothers he suddenly had. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice the sharp shink sound until it was too late. A razor-sharp hand was embedded in the tree trunk right next to his ear. Narrator's note: Snake Awakens is the art of conditioning one's hand into a blade of peerless sharpness. At the novice level, it can pierce solid wood. With mastery, it can shatter stone. At its peak, it is said to be able to sever even Nen-forged weapons. Roy had personally witnessed Silva use a single hand chop to slice a masterwork katana in two. He himself was still at the beginner stage. Sinking his hand a few inches into the wood was his current limit. Anything more would require years of brutal conditioning. His proficiency in sensing killing intent, however, was another matter. A lifetime of being surrounded by it had taught him a thing or two. He had sensed Tanjiro the moment his younger brother had found him. Roy pulled his hand from the deeply gouged tree trunk and turned to the familiar yet new face of his brother, a warm smile on his face. "Mother sent you to find me, didn't she? Sorry, I fell asleep for a bit. Didn't mean to make you all worry." Tanjiro stared at Roy's face, then glanced at his brother's unharmed hand, then back at the hole in the tree. He was breathing, but his mind hadn't caught up yet. He nodded dumbly, then shook his head violently like a rattle. Roy found his dazed expression amusing and ruffled his hair. "Got a lot of questions, huh?" Tanjiro shook his head again, then nodded. Roy's smile widened. "Today is Hanako's special day," he said gently. "Let's go celebrate with her first. We can talk later, okay?" Tanjiro nodded emphatically. Roy patted his shoulder, said no more, and with a flick of his foot, scooped the hand axe into his grip. He then bent down, hoisted the basket of charcoal onto his back, and began walking towards home. Tanjiro followed closely behind, his mind buzzing. He walked in a daze until the moon had risen above the treeline, stretching their shadows long across the snow. He finally stopped when Roy did. Through the curtain of snow, they could see the familiar cluster of small wooden cabins. A gentle wisp of smoke rose from the chimney of the easternmost cabin. They could faintly hear the laughter of children and the sound of an adult coughing. It was the very picture of a warm, peaceful mountain home. "It's a shame," Roy whispered, almost to himself. "In this world, demons are real. In 2 or 3 years, none of this will exist." Tanjiro looked up at him, confused. Demons. But his older brother clearly didn't want to explain. With another glance, he started walking again, heading for the warmth of home. Tanjiro blinked, tightened his scarf, and hurried to catch up. As they approached, the sound of their footsteps brought the family to the door. Seeing Roy and Tanjiro, the younger children cheered. There was Nezuko, Takeo, and Shigeru. And the youngest, still a babe in arms, Hanako, held securely by their white-haired grandmother. "Eiichiro-nichan, you're back." "Yeah," Roy replied with a genuine smile. "I'm back." His gaze met that of a man sitting on the edge of the veranda. The man coughed a few times, his hands fiddling with a set of ceremonial robes. Seeing Roy looking at him, he offered a gentle, welcoming smile of his own. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 4. Sun Breathing X First Use of Gyo. The smile felt both familiar and foreign to Roy. In the Zoldyck household, he had never once seen Silva smile. It was as if the very concept of a smile was fundamentally incompatible with the face of a cold, unfeeling assassin. Not even a cruel smirk or a predatory grin. Nothing. Sometimes, he wondered if Illumi's perpetually blank, doll-like expression was a direct result of their father's influence. After all, the family elders had drilled one lesson into him more than any other. An assassin must never let emotion cloud their judgment. Joy, anger, sorrow, grief, all must be concealed. Only by achieving a state of absolute calm can one complete the mission without exposing oneself to unnecessary risk. Perhaps it was because they saw that Roy could never truly achieve this state that Silva and Zeno had concluded his talent as an assassin was limited. And they were right. More than an assassin, Roy was fiercely determined to be a person. The job came second. He refused to become a machine that had inverted its priorities, annihilating its own humanity for the sake of killing. That was the core reason he had always disliked Illumi. Illumi was too formulaic. The family's education had systematically erased any joy he might have had as a child. He should have been like Nezuko, Takeo, and Shigeru, who were now swarming Roy, chattering excitedly, sharing their happiness, complaining about each other, and just being kids. He shouldn't be spending every waking moment in monotonous training with the lifeless eyes of a dead fish. 1,000 thoughts flashed through Roy's mind in an instant. He was pulled from his reverie when the little guy, Shigeru, wrapped his arms around his leg. The boy tilted his head back, his eyes wide and hopeful. "Big bro," he said in a piping voice. "Candy." Roy chuckled and pulled the small cloth pouch from his GI, tossing him a piece. That opened the floodgates. Nezuko wanted one. Takeo wanted one. Roy was suddenly surrounded, his hands full. He patted Nezuko's head, gave Takeo a reassuring pat on the back, and reminded Shigeru not to eat too fast, all while trying not to get overwhelmed. The warm, chaotic scene, illuminated by the soft glow of an oil lamp, was reflected in Tanjiro's eyes. It was a sight that finally let him feel a sense of familiarity. There he is. That was the big brother he knew. The phantom in the woods, that must have been a ghost that had possessed his soul. "Big bro, I want one too." Tanjiro rubbed his face, a wide grin spreading across it as he joined the fray. Being the responsible one, he first helped Roy take the heavy basket of charcoal off his back, which was a huge relief. Roy gave him a grateful nod. After satisfying the appetites of the little ones, he walked over to Tanjiro. "For me," Tanjiro looked at the single piece of candy in Roy's outstretched hand, a look of bewilderment on his face. When the realization sank in, a warmth spread through his chest and his eyes began to sting. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten candy. The memory was so distant, all he could recall was a vague image of his own father, Tanjiro's grandfather, when he was still alive. He never imagined that his own son would now be old enough to bring him candy. Tanjiro looked at Roy with gentle eyes and shook his head. "Fathers don't like sweets. You have it." Roy didn't pull his hand back. "Father gets one," he insisted. "Grandmother gets one. Mother gets one. Everyone gets one." Seeing his son's determination, Tanjiro knew it was pointless to argue. He smiled, unwrapped the candy, and placed it in his mouth, savoring the simple sweetness. As he did, he motioned for Roy to help him put on the ceremonial robes for the ritual dance. The dance was a tradition passed down through the Kamado family for generations, an offering to the fire god to pray for safety and protection from misfortune. The ritual dance and the Hanafuda earrings that dangled from Tanjiro's ears, depicting a red sun over a mountain, were a secret that only Roy, a reader of the original story, understood. They were the legacy of Yoriichi Sugikuni. The sun-breathing technique and the very earrings he wore in life. Since the time of our ancestor, Sumiyoshi, Tanjiro began as Roy helped tie the final sash, our family has required the eldest son to learn the Hinokami kagura. And now. It is your turn, Eiichiro. As the last rope was tied, the normally gentle Tanjiro stood up, and his entire presence changed. The red and white robes billowed in the wind, and the flame-emblazoned mask he wore seemed to come alive. He beckoned to Roy. "Come." Roy could barely contain his excitement. This was it. The opportunity to fundamentally change his physical constitution had arrived. The Hinokami kagura was sun-breathing. It was the original and most powerful of all breathing styles, the wellspring from which all others, moon, stone, wind, water, had diverged. Created by Yoriichi through his observation of the sun, it was a technique that allowed a user to absorb the sun's power to radically transform their own body. Of course, with great power came immense difficulty. Long ago, Yoriichi had shared the technique freely with the Demon Slayer Corps, even teaching his own twin brother, who would later become the upper rank 1 demon, Kokushibo. But none of them could master it. Neither Kokushibo nor the other swordsmen could withstand the sheer weight of the sun's power. From the Sengoku period to the present day, only Tanjiro had ever truly mastered it for combat, a testament to its incredible difficulty. Roy grabbed Tanjiro's arm. "You too." Before Tanjiro could process what was happening, Roy had already stepped into the courtyard, taking his place beside his father. He focused his mind and activated Gyo. Narrator's note. Distinct from the four major principles of Nen-ten, Zetsu, Ren, and Hatsu, Gyo is an advanced application. By focusing aura into the eyes, a Nen user can see things that are otherwise invisible, including another person's aura. Thanks to Goto's meticulous theoretical instruction and the inherent talent of his Zoldyck bloodline, mastering this basic application was no trouble at all. A milky white layer of aura coated his eyes. He stared, unblinking, at Tanjiro's movements. By observing the flow of energy within his father's body, he could deconstruct the Hinokami kagura, imprinting each movement into his mind like analyzing an animation frame by frame. First, dance, then, blue heaven, followed by raging sun, burning bones, summer sun, setting sun transformation, solar heat haze, thrusting sun. Tanjiro became a spirit of fire, dancing gracefully amidst the heavy snowfall. Beside him, Roy followed, meticulously copying every step. And beside Roy, a clumsy Tanjiro stumbled along. They went through the forms once, twice, 3 times. Soon, Tanjiro was gasping for air, unable to keep up. He bent over, hands on his knees, panting heavily. His eyes were glued to his father and brother, his young mind filled with profound confusion. Why was his normally frail father filled with such boundless energy? And why was his brother, who had been just as clumsy as him moments ago, now able to match their father's movements so perfectly? 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 5. The Butterfly Dream X The Return. No one could give Tanjiro an answer. Not even Tanjiro himself. All he knew was that the Hinokami kagura was a legacy passed down from his ancestors. If he willed it, he could perform the dance tirelessly for an entire night. He didn't understand the principle behind it, but Roy, using Gyo, saw it clearly. It was the sun breathing that gave Tanjiro his strength, allowing him to fight off the biting cold and sustain his stamina. Unfortunately, Tanjiro didn't know how to truly wield this power. Or rather, his frail body was simply incapable of withstanding its full, overwhelming force. Even if Roy explained the method to him, the searing intensity of the sun's power would likely incinerate him from the inside out. Once, twice, 5, 6 repetitions. Sleeves fluttered, kicking up flurries of snow. Tanjiro could no longer keep up and collapsed into a sitting position on the ground. In the snow-swept night, only Tanjiro and Roy were left dancing. Roy progressed from clumsy and awkward to passable, then to a state of seamless fluidity. He moved with increasing ease, until he was perfectly in sync with Tanjiro's rhythm. Tanjiro noticed the change. His initial surprise gave way to a challenge, and he intentionally increased his speed, testing his son. A smile unknowingly bloomed on his lips. A thought drifted through his mind. If Eiichiro's grandfather could see this, he would be astonished by his talent for the Hinokami kagura. But the ancestors were gone. And Tanjiro had a premonition that it wouldn't be long before he joined them. A gust of wind rustled through the trees, scattering Tanjiro's thoughts. Snowflakes slipped through the eye holes of his mask, melting on his face. The man felt a mix of pride and sorrow, his heart filling with a profound sense of guilt and regret. His mother was old and could no longer work. He had been sick for years, unable to perform heavy labor. His wife, Kai, was needed at home to care for their growing family. Soon, the entire burden of their family would fall onto Roy's young shoulders. And as a father, it seemed the only thing left for him to do was pray. Then I will pray with all my heart. Oh, great God of fire. I pray that you watch over Eiichiro and my children. Keep them from sickness and harm. Grant them peace and safety. With a final, elegant sweep of his long sleeves, Tanjiro completed the 8th repetition of the dance and came to a stop. He lifted the mask, revealing a face that was pale and gaunt with illness. Roy, a half step behind, finished his own movements, a feeling of unfulfillment lingering. He reached out and supported his father, helping him back to the veranda. Tanjiro patted his son's hand and leaned against a wooden pillar to rest. The younger children swarmed them, cheering and chattering. Some praised how beautifully Tanjiro danced, others exclaimed how amazing Roy was, and a few teased Tanjiro for being as clumsy as a toad. Tanjiro didn't get angry. He lunged for Takeo, the one who was teasing him, trying to grab the boy's ahoge cowlick. But Takeo dodged and hid behind Roy. Big brother Eiichiro, Tanjiro was just too clumsy. Takeo crowed. Call him, brother Tanjiro, Roy said, delivering a light chop to Takeo's head. He gave him an amused but stern look before sitting down himself, replaying the dance in his mind. The children only saw the surface. Roy knew the truth. It wasn't that he was smarter than Tanjiro. On the contrary, he had 2 distinct advantages. First, he could use Gyo, which allowed him to analyze Tanjiro's movements with a clarity Tanjiro couldn't possibly have. Second, thanks to the Zoldyck family's hellish training, his physical conditioning was vastly superior to Tanjiro's, allowing him to mimic the complex motions far more quickly. Besides, Tanjiro was destined to master sun breathing. Roy, on the other hand, still had to face the ultimate trial. He had to withstand the weight of the sun. If he could bear it, he would master sun breathing completely. If he couldn't, this was all just a beautiful, fleeting dream. The boy centered himself, neither joyous nor dejected. After he finished his mental review, he got up and went into the kitchen. A moment later, he returned with 2 plates of rice dumplings. Simple white rice wrapped in vinegar-soaked cloth and drizzled with a light sauce, this was the main course for tonight's celebration. That, and the miso soup Kai had prepared. The soup had a single piece of pork floating in it. The meal was so meager it made Roy pause. Since being born into the Zoldyck family, he'd never eaten so poorly. Lavish meals of meat and fish were the norm, to say nothing of the expensive medicinal supplements he was given to aid his training. Looking now at Tanjiro's sickly condition, at the worn faces of Kai and his grandmother, at the thinness of the children, Roy finally, deeply understood. In an age stalked by demons, just being alive was a luxury. And in 2 years, every single one of these vibrant, smiling faces, save for Tanjiro and Nezuko, would be gone. That was a future Roy refused to accept. To accept their legacy is to accept responsibility for them. Since I'm learning their sun breathing, I owe them a debt. At the bare minimum, I'll see to it that they never go hungry for meat again. His resolve solidified. As Kai smiled and announced that dinner was ready, Roy put his hands together in thanks, picked up his bowl, and began to eat heartily under the night sky. After the meal, he helped Kai clean up and tuck the younger children into bed. Then, he took off his socks and sandals and crawled into his own bedding, letting the day's exhaustion wash over him. The night was deep, but the heavy snow cast a bright, pale light over the landscape. Roy, Tanjiro, Takeo, and Shigeru all slept together on a large, shared futon. As he closed his eyes, he could hear the faint sound of Takeo grinding his teeth and Shigeru letting out soft puffs of gas. The sounds, the smells, it all felt so real. Real enough that Roy began to wonder if, when he next awoke, he would truly leave this place and return to his own reality. Beside him, Tanjiro tossed and turned like a fish out of water, unable to sleep. Finally, he rolled over to Roy's side, his large amber eyes wide in the gloom. "Bro," he whispered. "You asleep?" Bro was Tanjiro's unique name for him. The younger kids, including Nezuko, all called him Brother Eiichiro. Roy kept his eyes closed. "Yeah." Tanjiro went silent. He let out a small, "oh," pulled the blanket over his face, and lay still. Roy knew what he wanted to ask. And Tanjiro knew Roy didn't want to talk about it right now. The truth was, Roy just hadn't figured out a good explanation yet. This was, after all, his first time opening the gate of cognition and stepping into this world. "So please, my foolish, dear little brother, just give me a little more time. Just a little." With that thought, Roy's consciousness faded into the quiet dark. He fell into a deep sleep. Until, AWOOOO. A familiar, chilling howl ripped him from his slumber. It was the howl of the Zoldyck family's personal magical beast, a creature whose duties included devouring trespassers and serving as the family's pre-dawn alarm clock. It was Mike. It was 3:50 a.m. Roy was awake. He sat up in bed. He saw the grandfather clock in the corner of his room, the familiar mahogany desk, the massive wardrobe. He knew, without a doubt, that he had left the world of Demon Slayer and returned to the Zoldyck estate. Just moments ago, he was huddled in a simple wooden cabin, bracing against the frigid cold. Now, he was back in a grand, stone castle, enduring the oppressive summer heat. Was he Roy Zoldyck, who had just dreamed of being a charcoal burner's son? Or was he Eiichiro Kamado, now dreaming he was an assassin? Roy stared into the darkness, lost in thought for a long, long time. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 6, The Weight of the Sun X A Debate of Men and Dogs. After a moment, a sharp clarity cut through the lingering haze of sleep in his eyes. Right, why agonize over what was real and what was illusion? What did it matter? The person he was on Earth was real. The Roy Zoldyck he was now was real. The Eiichiro Kamado he had just been was also real. They were all facets of a single existence. All he needed to do was focus on the here and now, on the people in front of him. A faint smile returned to Roy's lips as he got up and began to dress. It was nearly 4 in the morning. His daily run couldn't be skipped, he would use it as a warm-up for his first attempt at sun breathing in this world. The moment he had woken up, Roy was thrilled to find that his system interface now listed sun breathing. The skill was grayed out, however, with a single note: activation requires withstanding the weight of the sun. The weight of the sun. Roy pulled on his tank top and shorts and gazed out the window. A pale, fish belly light was beginning to tear at the edges of the night's darkness. The raw, searing power contained within that light would undoubtedly be a trial of the mind and spirit. He wasn't certain he could pass, but there was only one way to find out. The boy took a deep breath, opened his door, and began to run. As he moved, the Zoldyck estate was a world of its own quiet activity. In one room, a certain old man on a rocking chair continued to snore to the sound of his cartoons. In a darkened bedroom down the hall, a pale, doll-like face suddenly opened its eyes in the blackness. And in the master bedroom on the second floor, a man's powerful shadow moved with brutal dominance against a floor-to-ceiling window. Everyone was busy with their own urgent matters. Roy, likewise, would not allow himself a moment of slack. From the peak of the mountain to the base and back up again. His 10-kilometer run was over in what felt like an instant. By the time he returned to his room, a brilliant dawn was breaking. The sun, a blazing crimson orb, crested the horizon, washing over him with an aura of primordial power and boundless life. Roy felt a resonance deep within him. He closed his eyes and began to practice the forms of the sun breathing. But unlike Tanjiro, this time, he moved with Nen. Using the breathing style as a conduit, he began to circulate his aura through his body. Immediately, he felt a searing heat. The heat intensified with every movement. As he transitioned from dance to blue heaven and raging sun, the heat grew into an inferno, igniting him from head to toe. Pain. Blinding, absolute pain. It felt as if he were being burned alive on a pyre, a torment so excruciating he nearly lost consciousness. He braced himself against the doorframe, the only thing keeping him from collapsing. It was in that moment he truly understood the weight of the feat. From the Sengoku period to the present, a span of centuries, only a single person, Tanjiro Kamado, had ever mastered this power. This rotten world must be reduced to ash. I will let the sun shine down and leave no shadow for the wicked to hide in. With the true fire of the sun, I will incinerate all darkness and slay every last demon. In the depths of his agony, on the verge of blacking out, Roy thought he heard someone's voice echoing across time. An image formed in his mind's eye. It was a swordsman with a flute tucked into his belt. He had deep crimson hair and a flame-like mark spreading across his forehead. He stood silently at the end of time, watching Roy with a gentle expression, his lips moving. The words sounded like, "Those who seek the ultimate truth will arrive at the same destination, though they walk different paths. Brother, I told you not to worry. The breathing style would not be lost. Now you see, don't you? Yorichi Sugikuni." It had to be him. As Roy recognized the face from his memories, his body finally gave out. He slid down the doorframe and collapsed onto the floor. Instantly, the soul-rending heat vanished. Roy was free. He gasped for breath, his entire body feeling hollowed out and weak. But the suffering had not been in vain. A familiar chime from his system offered its reward. Notice. Sun breathing has been activated. Current mastery. Novice 1/100th. Finally, I did it. A triumphant grin spread across Roy's face. The red sun bathed his features in its morning light, and he instinctively spread his arms, embracing the moment. It was now 5 in the morning. As the old grandfather clock chimed the hour, Goto arrived as usual, pushing the breakfast cart. He knocked habitually on the door, then paused, seeing it was already open with Roy sitting slumped against the frame. Frowning in concern, Goto walked over and reached down to help him up. Just then, Roy opened his eyes. In that instant, Goto felt a spike of agony in his vision. It was like staring directly into the sun, or having a high-powered laser aimed straight into his pupils. His sight exploded into a white haze. Oj! His scream echoed through the stone halls. After that incident, Roy's personal butler was changed from Goto to the formidable Subone. How is he? The doctors said it's a temporary, stress-induced blindness. His sight should return in a few days. That's good to hear. Goto was taken away for treatment. After finishing his morning training, Roy sat down for lunch, listening to Subone's report. He speared a piece of steak with his fork, his brow furrowed. Give him double his salary for the month. There is no precedent for such a thing, the old butler stated, her hands crossed before her, her face an emotionless mask. He is a dog of the Zoldyck family. A bowl of food is sufficient. As for you, young master. Subone leaned forward, her massive, cyborg-like frame looming over him, casting him completely in her shadow. Her expression was severe. The master has instructed me to ask you how, precisely, Godo was injured. Roy knew Silva wanted an answer. Subone wanted an answer. But Godo hadn't betrayed him. Roy intended to honor that loyalty. He calmly picked up a napkin and wiped his mouth. I believe that as his master, I have no obligation to explain myself to a dog. He then looked her in the eye. You call Godo a dog. Are you not one as well? Subone nodded, as if stating a simple fact. Of course I am. Her tone shifted, becoming as sharp as steel. But the master is not. Then he can come and ask me himself. Roy pushed his chair back and stood up. He had respect for the butlers who were willing to die for his family, but he could never accept their dehumanizing view of themselves. He walked past Subone, heading for the door. As he did, he passed a ghost with empty, lifeless eyes. Illumi must have just returned from a job. The thick, cloying stench of blood clung to him. His older brother walked towards him, hands in his pockets. As they were about to pass each other, Illumi suddenly stopped. He turned his head, his black eyes fixing on Roy. A dog is a dog, he said, his voice flat and devoid of inflection. A person is also a dog. Killing a person is as simple as killing a dog. Is that so? Roy shot back with a cold smirk, not bothering to turn around. He left Illumi with the sight of his back, not yet broad, but radiating a defiant light. Then congratulations, my canine little brother. At least you're self-aware. Illumi's expression did not change, but the air around him dropped 20 degrees. Shing. His hand blurred, his fingers stiffening into a deadly blade. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 7. The fanatical Subone X Snow Walker. Illumi spun, his hand blade striking at Roy's neck. The carotid artery, one of the body's most vulnerable points. Alongside ripping out the heart, it was one of Illumi's 2 favorite finishing moves. Roy sensed the whisper of displaced air. He didn't turn, he simply shot his own hand blade back in a counter-strike. But there was a crucial difference. Unlike Illumi's, his hand was cloaked in Nen. While Roy hadn't formally trained in the advanced Nen applications like N for perception, Shu for imbuing objects, In for concealment, or Ken for advanced defense, nothing stopped him from intuitively focusing his aura into a single point. It was a crude but brutally effective application of the same principles. The result was decisive. 2 blurs of motion met with a sickening thwack. Illumi's attack was stopped dead. He immediately recoiled, melting back into the shadows of the hallway. He raised his left arm defensively, but his right hand, the one he'd struck with, was trembling uncontrollably. It was like hitting solid steel. An assassin's instinct screamed at him to counterattack again, but his target seemed to have already lost interest. To Roy, Illumi was no longer a person. He was an obstacle, an annoyance, and one does not waste time on an ill-behaved dog that snaps from the shadows. Tap, tap, the soft soles of his athletic shoes patted against the ancient, worn stone floor. Without a backward glance, Roy shook his hand as if he'd just swatted a fly. He continued down the corridor and disappeared from Illumi's sight, heading for the training hall. The afternoon sun streamed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in a hot, bright light. It was the perfect time to practice sun breathing. Roy wasn't about to let 1 or 2 misbehaving dogs ruin his mood or his training schedule. He planted his feet and began to dance. In the days that followed, a strange new spectacle became common in the Zoldyck estate. The eldest son, dressed in simple training clothes, could be seen, dancing, day and night in the training hall, a sight that grated on the nerves of the entire household. He's still at it. Yes, master, he is. Has he neglected his other training? No, master. All other regimens are being completed on schedule. Sitting on a tiger skin sofa, Silva listened to Subone's daily report on Roy's activities, a hand propping up his chin as he sank into thought. Then, to Subone's utter astonishment, he stood up. He began to imitate Roy's movements. First, dance, then, blue heaven, followed by, raging sun, burning bones, summer sun. When he completed the final form, dragon sun halo dance, Silva stood motionless in the center of the room, analyzing, processing. For a long time, he didn't move. Subone stood beside him, hands clasped, silent as the grave. Her ingrained self-perception reminded her that as a dog, a loyal old dog who had served the Zoldyck family for decades, she must never, ever bark while her master was thinking. Even so, She couldn't hide her shock. This was the first time she had ever seen the family head imitate someone else's actions. And that someone was the very son he had deemed to have limited potential. Ha! A heavy breath escaped Silva's lips. After what felt like an eternity, he moved again, returning to the sofa. He gave a slight wave of his hand, and Subone knew she was dismissed. Creak! The heavy wooden door closed behind her. Just as it sealed, a voice came from within, sending a jolt through the old butler. Inform Roy that he is to compile a detailed summary of his insights into those movements and deliver it to me. The tone was absolute. There was no room for refusal. Subone stood facing the closed door for a moment, then placed a hand over her heart and bowed deeply. That evening, she found Roy in the training hall, drenched in sweat. When Roy heard the command, he showed no surprise. He simply stopped his movements, glanced up towards the master bedroom on the second floor, and made his choice. He refused. The sun breathing was his trump card, a power he had conjured from his own Nen ability, from his world of cognition. Out of respect for Tanjiro's legacy and for the sake of his own secrets, he could not and would not teach it to anyone. Besides, the more he practiced, the more he realized how little he truly understood it. In a 4-hour session, he had achieved a state of true immersion for only a few fleeting moments. The rest of the time felt wasted. Where would he find the time or energy to instruct someone else? And more importantly, that wasn't how you ask for a favor. Even from your own father. I believe I have the right to refuse, Roy said, wiping the sweat from his neck. He decided a direct approach was best. Subone froze. She clearly had not anticipated this answer. This wasn't just anyone, this was a direct order from Silva, the current head of the Zoldyck family. She responded automatically. May I ask for a reason? Roy smiled. It was a thin, sharp smile. For the first time, he truly sized up the old woman, a fellow conjurer. Her mystical butler ability, which allowed her to conjure various vehicles, was a testament to how thoroughly she had been domesticated. A reason. Roy slung the towel over his shoulder and looked up at her towering frame, his voice laced with scorn. Since you pride yourself on being a dog, you should have the awareness of one. A dog should never ask about its master's business. Subone stood there, utterly stunned. It was as if she'd been struck by a curse, unable to move, unable to speak. After a long, silent moment, she turned and shuffled away. Just like in the original timeline, she was largely indifferent to all the Zoldyck children except Kahlua. And so, Roy felt no need to be polite with her. He simply prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation with Silva. But, surprisingly, nothing happened. Days passed, and the incident was never mentioned again. Subone vanished, and Silva never brought it up, even when they passed each other in the halls. It wasn't until Godot returned, his eyesight fully recovered, that Roy heard a whisper of what had happened. She stabbed herself 3 times. She's in the medical wing recovering now, the young butler explained as he served Roy his dinner, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. She got off easy. Had it been me who failed to carry out the young master's implied wishes by questioning him, I would have taken my own life. Right, you're even more intense. Roy was speechless. All he could do was sigh. This is so Zoldyck. In this family, butlers were property, tools, dogs. Even if Roy saw them as people, they would insist on their own dehumanization, and wear it as a badge of honor. He decided to change the subject. The item I asked you to procure. Any news? When he had noticed his dancing efficiency was dropping, Roy had analyzed the problem and come up with 3 reasons. Sun breathing was fundamentally a sword dance. He needed a sword. He lacked the methodology for total concentration breathing. He had no master to guide him. The latter 2 could only be solved within his gate of cognition. But the first. Shing. With a sharp, metallic ring, Godot drew a katana from his side and presented it to Roy with both hands. There is no news on the Nen-forged weapon you requested, young master. However, the armory did contain 1 blade of exceptional quality. What's its name? Snowwalker. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 8. Swordsmanship X the Demon. Snowwalker. The blade was named for its pure white sheath and hilt. It was a trophy Zeno had taken from a master swordsman decades ago. Roy hefted the katana, giving it a few experimental swings. It felt a little light in his hands. He took a stance and executed a clean, diagonal slash, carving a perfect arc through the air. The effect was immediate. The system panel flashed in his vision. Physique plus 0.05. So that was it. He had been approaching it from the wrong direction, ignoring the fundamental nature of sun breathing. It was a technique designed for a swordsman. The proof was in the new skill that had just unlocked on his interface. Congratulations! Swordsmanship. Skill unlocked. Current swordsmanship level. LV1 1/100th. Is this an expected surprise, or an unexpected one? Roy slid the blade back into its sheath. As he did, there was a sharp crack. The solid oak dining table, with him as the center point, split cleanly in two. Goto moved with lightning speed, his hands a blur as he caught the plates and bowls before they could crash to the floor. "Young master," the butler said calmly, though with a hint of warning. "This is an exceptionally sharp blade. It would be best not to handle it in your bedroom." Roy nodded, not disagreeing. It was a fine sword, no doubt. Just a little too light for his taste. He also wondered if it was possible to reverse conjure it to bring it with him into the world of Demon Slayer. "I'll try it tonight." At 10 o'clock, after the grandfather clock chimed the hour, Roy finished his bath. He changed into his sleepwear and lay down on his bed, the sheathed snowwalker held close. After a full day of the Zoldyck training regimen, electric shock tolerance, poison resistance, and his own sun-breathing practice, his body was screaming with fatigue. Sleep came easily. Soon, he found himself floating in the familiar, kaleidoscopic tunnel. This time, before entering, Roy deliberately looked at his right hand. It was empty, not a trace of Snowwalker. He gave a wry, self-deprecating smile. He'd gotten his hopes up. It was a known quirk of conjurers. A certain kind of obsessive, often neurotic personality. It was what led to some of the most bizarre nen abilities out there. Shizuku, who could forget things she'd just seen, Kortopi, with his strange fixation on copying objects, even Kite, whose crazy slots was the very definition of an unpredictable, temperamental power. With no sword at his side, Roy felt a strange sense of freedom. He stepped into the tunnel and drifted towards the sea of his subconscious. As for a weapon, he'd figure it out. The world of Demon Slayer had its swordsmith village. If that didn't work, there was always the black Nichiren blade Yorichi had left inside the Zero-type training doll. His plan set, Roy soon saw the familiar wooden door with the Oni mask hanging above it. Without hesitation, he pushed it open and stepped through. The familiar sensation of falling washed over him. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the small wooden cabin. Beside him, Takeo and Shigeru were fast asleep. As kids do, they'd thrashed around in the night, ending up in a tangled mess of limbs, their blankets kicked onto the floor. Roy quietly got up and tucked them back in. The small movement was enough to wake Tanjiro. "Bro," Tanjiro's bright, clear eyes were fixed on him. "Can you take me with you into the mountains today? Please." "Can I really say no?" Roy figured the kid hadn't slept a wink, his mind still reeling from the impossible things he'd seen the day before. It was a lot for anyone to process. He gave him a mock glare. "Well, are you going to get up, or are you waiting for me to put your shoes on for you?" Sorry. Tanjiro scrambled out of the bedding, buzzing with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning. Roy ignored his frantic energy, pushed open the door, and stepped out into a world of white. The first thing he saw was his mother, Kai, emerging from the kitchen, her head wrapped in a scarf. She was holding a cloth bundle containing several steaming hot rice balls, which she promptly stuffed into Roy's hands. "Eat these on the way. Don't wait for them to get cold." Then she spotted the other figure. "Tanjiro, why are you carrying the basket?" "I'm going with bro into the mountains." "No, you are not." "Yes, I am. Honey, are you going to do something about this?" she called out. "If he wants to go, let him go with Eiichiro." Tanjiro's quiet voice came from the veranda, where he had appeared without a sound. "You," Kai sighed, looking from her husband to her impossibly stubborn son. She turned back to Roy, adjusted the scarf around his neck, and said, "Look after your brother. Be back before dark." Just then, their grandmother emerged, holding baby Hanako. Tanjiro opened his mouth, wanting to declare that he could protect himself, and his brother too. But then the image of Roy moving like a phantom through the trees, of his hand piercing solid wood, flashed in his mind. He wisely shut his mouth and simply snuck glances at Roy. Roy ignored him, his gaze moving from his mother to his father, to his grandmother and Hanako. A gentle, genuine smile touched his lips. "I'll be back," he said. With that, he picked up his hand axe, shouldered the empty basket, and turned towards the forest. "Bro, wait for me," a clumsy Tanjiro called out, scrambling to catch up. Kai, Tanjiro, and their grandmother watched them go, their figures shrinking into the vast, snowy landscape. The warmth of that small cabin, the simple feeling of family, lingered in Roy's heart. It was something he had never, ever felt in the cold halls of the Zoldyck estate. He savored it, he cherished it. For the first time, the thought crossed his mind that maybe, staying in this world wouldn't be so bad. Pant, Tanjiro finally caught up. Roy knew exactly what he was about to ask. He decided to cut him off. Tanjiro, he said, his voice calm. Do you believe that there are other worlds, beyond the ground we walk on? Really, bro? Tanjiro's eyes went wide. Roy led him through the deep snow, their footsteps the only sound in the quiet woods. I once had a dream, he began, his voice low and even. In my dream, I went to another world. In that world, I had a new family, new parents, new brothers. Our family business was killing people. I was trained as an assassin from the day I was born. When I woke up from that dream, I found that I knew things, skills for killing that no one had ever taught me. And I realized, that dream was real. Tanjiro's jaw dropped. A clump of snow fell from a birch branch above and landed on his head, but he didn't notice. It took him a moment to process it all. That's amazing, he finally breathed. It's like old man Saburo's stories, about demons in the world. No, Roy said, stopping dead in his tracks. Those are real. Tanjiro, not expecting the sudden stop, stumbled and bumped into his back. The boy grunted, rubbing his head. A second later, his nose twitched violently. His expression changed from confusion to alarm. Blood. Bro, I smell a lot of blood up ahead. I see it. Roy lowered the basket from his shoulders, planting the hand axe in the snow in front of him. He stood protectively before Tanjiro, his eyes narrowed to slits.